Hello, my name is Anna and I welcome you to this new video on this channel, Jóvenes Peregrinando. Today's video is based on chapters 21 and 22 of Genesis, and the title is A Promise of Consecration and Trust as People of the Eternal, added by Yeshúa, Part 2. Today we are going to see how the Eternal, through this patriarch Abraham, reveals his perfect plan, not only for his people, but also for humanity. And starting off with the first 3 verses of chapter 21, it says, "The Eternal kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. She became pregnant and she gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. This happened at just the time Elohim had said it would, and Abraham named their son Isaac." In chapter 18 of Genesis, it narrates how the 3 men of Elohim visited Abraham and prophesied to him about the birth of Yitzhak, which is in Hebrew, or as it's better known as Isaac. And although Sarah laughed at the moment when she heard that she was going to conceive a child, the reason why she laughed is because she couldn't believe that at her age she was going to be able to do this. But then later on, we are able to read that she rejoiced because the Eternal once again fulfilled his promise. Sarah's old age and her sterility were not impediments. The Eternal showed that he is faithful and that he knows the precise time of things to happen and for his purposes to be fulfilled. It's been 25 years since Abraham arrived in Canaan until the birth of Isaac. And although Abraham was already 100 years old when Isaac was born, but his trust was placed in the Eternal, and he trusted that although he was old, but the Eternal would still fulfill his promise. In Romans chapter 4 verses 18 through 22, it says, "Against all hope, Abraham, in hope, believed and so became the father of many nations, just as it had been said to him, 'So shall your offspring be.' And Abraham's faith did not weaken, even though at about 100 years of age, he figured his body was as good as dead, and so was Sarah's womb. Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of Elohim, but was strengthened in his faith and gave splendor to the Eternal. He was fully convinced that Elohim was able to do what he had promised, and because of Abraham's faith, the Eternal counted him as righteous." Abraham's life teaches us the importance of faith inside the believer's life. He trusted and he acted, and that is why we can see that his faith was strengthened. In the same way, this should be our way of living as children of Elohim, having a living faith like Abraham's, despite the tests, the adversities, and all the time he had to wait for this promise to be fulfilled. Even so, we can see that he did not weaken. In him, we do not see the complaint, we do not see the sadness and doubt when seeing that the promise of the Eternal took time to be fulfilled. But on the contrary, in him, we see obedience, we see patience, we see hope and security. These are aspects that we must imitate because we await the fulfillment of the Eternal when his Son returns, and we should wait as Abraham did. Despite the afflictions that may arise in our lives, we should learn how to wait. Just as Abraham strengthened his faith, so must we strengthen our faith day by day through communion with the Creator and obedience to His word. Because in the same way that in those days the Eternal fulfilled Abraham's promise, He will also fulfill it now through His Son Yeshua. Verse 4 says, when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as the Eternal commanded him. In this verse, we can read that Isaac was 8 days old when Abraham took him to get circumcised. This was a sign of the pact that the Eternal made to Abraham, made with Abraham and his descendants. And Abraham, obeying the Eternal, went and circumcised his son. As we know nowadays, in the sign of pact through Yeshua, it's the holy breath and the life of the believer. When we return to the Father through Yeshua, we are made rooms of the divine presence that we are called to circumcise, and we are called to circumcise the mind and the heart, putting to death all the fruitless works of the flesh and living by the Spirit in holiness and obedience to the instruction of the Eternal. Verses 6 through 8 say, Sarah said, "The Eternal has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse a children? Yet I have bare him a son in his old age." And the child grew and was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Sarah, this time, didn't laugh out of mistrust or doubt, but she laughed of happiness. She felt great joy because the Eternal had given her the happiness of being a 99-year-old mother. It's surprising to see how the Almighty gave her the strength to fulfill this important role. Today, scientists may say, or science can say, that this was impossible, or that this is impossible. But as the Eternal said in Genesis 18, verse 14, "Is anything too hard for the Eternal? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." For our Creator, we can see that nothing is impossible for Him. And in several occasions, we can also see that He opened wombs to sterile women, such as Raquel, Anna, Samuel's mother, Rebecca, the mother of Samson, or like the mother of John the Baptist, whose his mother's case was very similar to Sarah's. Without doubt, the Eternal always fulfilled His purposes, and He is powerful. He is powerful to do works greater than what we think and than what we understand. And having a Heavenly Father like that, there can't be any space for doubt and disbelief in our life. Let us remember that as long as we submit to the will of the Father, He will fulfill His purpose in our lives, and His plans are always better than ours, which are good for us. Verses 9 through 12 say, "But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had bare to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, 'Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. This upset Abraham very much because Ishmael was his son, but Elohim said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will continue." It is commented that Ishmael was jealous of Isaac. And because of this, it's why we see that Sarah tells Abraham to get rid of Ishmael and his slave woman. This might seem somewhat extreme, but sometimes between brothers, it is to a certain extent normal for these controversial situations to happen. We can see that Abraham thought that this matter thought this matter very seriously, but the Eternal second this time Sarah's decision. And when we read these words, we will realize why. In verse 10 we read, "And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, so that the woman's son will never share for that the woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." We can understand that the Eternal allows this to happen as a shadow of what will happen in the future. Just as in the book of Galatians, it is mentioned that it is an allegory. The son of the slave represents the earthly Jerusalem, the one that is in slavery. And the son of the free one represents the heavenly Jerusalem, that is in freedom and lives in the holy breath, by the holy breath. And we can find in Galatians 4 verses 22 through 28 say, "For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by the slave woman and the other by the free woman. His son by the slave woman was born according to the flesh, but his son by the free woman was born as the result of a divine presence." These things are being taken figuratively. The women represent two covenants. These two women serve as an illustration of the Eternal's two covenants. The first woman, Agar, represents Mount Sinai, where people received the law that enslaved them. Now Agar, standing for Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to the present city of Jerusalem because she is in slavery with her child. But the Jerusalem that is above is free, and she is our mother. As Isaiah said, "Rejoice, old childless woman. You who have never given birth, break into a joyful shout. You who have never been in labor, for the desolate woman now has more children than the woman who lives with her husband. And you, dear brothers and sisters, are children of the promise, just like Isaac." The Eternal sent Abraham to listen to Sarah because in Isaac would from him the offspring will continue. And as Shaul mentions, we too, like Isaac, are children of the offspring. We wait through Yeshúa for our inheritance, which is not here below, where the children of slavery are rooted or are bared, but in heaven. Continuing with verses 13 through 19, it says, "But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he is your son too." So Abraham got up early the next morning, prepared food and a container of water, and strapped them on Agar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with their son, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself about 100 yards away. "I don't want to watch the boy die," she said, as she burst into tears. But Elohim heard the boy crying, and the angel of the Eternal called to Agar from heaven. "Agar, what's wrong? Do not be afraid. The Eternal has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants." The Eternal opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the container with water and gave the boy a drink. We see that the Eternal doesn't forget about Ishmael. He promises Abraham that a great nation will come out of his descendants. Then we see that when Ishmael and his mother left the place where they were currently living, his father Abraham gave them a container of water along with food. But then, for a time when they were wandering through the desert through Beersheba, they ran out of water, and Hagar thought that Ishmael was going to die. And because of that, we can read that she put him in the side of a bush, 100 yards away from her, so that she wouldn't see his son, her son died. But as it has been mentioned, the Eternal was not going to forget about Ishmael. We can read that the Eternal heard the boys crying, and through his angel he talked to Agar, not only to give them water, but also to remind them that from his offspring would come a great nation. Verses 20 through 21 say, "And Elohim was with the boy as he grew up in the wilderness. He became a skillful archer, and while he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt." Later, we will study how the Eternal also fulfilled this promise regarding Ishmael. And we will be able to read that from him 12 princes were born, and from there on they became a nation, a great nation. Contrary to what is believed, the Ishmaelites were not enemies of Israel. On the contrary, it is said that the Arabs helped and protected the descendants of Jacob in several occasions, very different from the descendants of Sab, who are the people of Dom or Moab or Midian, who although they also had relatives, but they became enemies of the Israelites. Verses 22 through 26 say, "At that time Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, 'The Eternal is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me, here before the Eternal, that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown to you.' Abraham said, 'I swear it.' Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, 'I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today.' After what happened to Ishmael, Abimelech maybe sometime later visited Abraham. Abimelech was a strong man who took Sarah as his wife, thinking that she was Abraham's sister. But then the Eternal revealed to him that Sarah was actually Abraham's wife, and he told him that he was committing a great sin. This man then feared the Creator and returned Sarah to Abraham. On this occasion, Abimelech approached Abraham again together with the captain of his army to agree with him and make an agreement of peace and respect. For this man, recognizing that the Eternal, these men recognized that the Eternal was with Abraham at all times. Abraham also mentions to him the matter of a well that one of his servants had unjustly taken from him. And we can read that Abimelech apparently takes care of the matter by how it is narrated in the verses. Finally, this chapter ends by saying that they remain in peace and that Abraham lived as a foreigner many days in that land. This is a very interesting aspect that indicates that Abraham lived as a pilgrim and foreigner in this world. He did not seek to settle in the land permanently or in any type of land that he was. He did not seek to stay there permanently, but he preferred to remain as a foreigner because his hope was not placed in this earth, but it was placed in the heavenly promise. As we see in Hebrews 11 verses 13 through 16 that say, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, the Eternal is not ashamed to be called their Elohim, for he has prepared a city for them. And this concludes chapter 21. And now, in chapter 22, we're going to analyze an event that is very controversial, especially because the Eternal asks Abraham to give him his son. Unbelieving people often criticize this event a lot, ignoring that it goes far beyond freedom, and that the Eternal did not really want the sacrifice of Isaac, but rather that he wanted to represent what he himself would do with his son later on for the benefit of humanity. Verses 1 and 2 say, sometime later, the Eternal tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. And he replied, here I am. Then the Eternal said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. We see that the Eternal tested Abraham. The Eternal tested the fidelity of his servants, or of his servant. The Eternal really did know that Abraham feared him. He did know that he obeyed him fully, and later on he mentions it. The Father wanted to show something else when he says, take your only son whom you love. Here he is referring to the Messiah, because we know that Isaac was not the only son of Abraham, because besides Abraham, he also had Ishmael. But Yeshua is the only Son of the Almighty, the only begotten, the one that has been emanated from the Father. How it is mentioned in John 1 verse 18 that says, "No one has ever seen Elohim, but the one and only Son who is at the Father's side, he has made him known." In turn, Yeshua is also the beloved Son of the Eternal, and the Father confirms it, and we can see that on several occasions in the scripture it is mentioned. In Matthew 3 verses 16 through 17 it says, "As soon as Yeshua was immersed, he went up out of the water, and At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of Elohim descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, 'This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am pleased. I am well pleased.'" It is noted that Isaac is the figure of Yeshua, whom his father, the Eternal, would deliver as a korban in prohibition for humanity. Abraham's attitude is remarkable and admirable. We can see that he does not question the Eternal, even in such a difficult situation. After he had waited so long for that son that the Eternal told him and promised him that from him from him would come the offspring. It is normal for Abraham to feel dissatisfied or annoyed at this request, but we can see that this does not happen. Abraham does not feel that way. On the contrary, he was willing. In the mind and heart of Abraham, obeying the Eternal was more important than anything else. He trusted that Elohim would keep his promises in any circumstance. Abraham was willing to give up who he loved to please the Eternal. He recognized that his own life did not belong to him, and that everything belonged to the Father, and that the main purpose of man's life is to do the will of the Creator. Everything else is secondary. Continuing with verses 3 to 5, it says, "Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood from the burnt offering, he set out for the place Elohim had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, 'Stay here with the donkey, while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you.'" We see that that Abraham does not stop to think and meditate, but we can see that he receives the order and complies. He also took 2 servants with him, and this was so there could be 2 witnesses. This mention of the 3rd day also refers to the Messiah, his death and resurrection. For as we know, he, Yeshua, the Messiah, was 3 days and 3 nights in the Sheol. Abraham tells his servants that he and his son would go to serve the Creator, to worship the Creator, and that they will return back. And he tells them that to stay down there with the donkey. Continuing with verses 6 through 8 say, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife as the two of them went on together. Isaac spoke up and said to his father, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said. "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "The Eternal himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. We can see that Isaac continues to show in his life what would happen with the Messiah who carried the timber on him when he went to the place where he would be delivered. Also, that place is the same Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. It's the same place as where Abraham and Isaac went and where Yeshua was delivered. Later, Isaac asks his father about, we can see that Isaac asks his father about the lamb for the burnt offering. As we know, this is one of the sacrifices where the victim gave himself up completely. First, his blood was shed, that is, he gave his life, and then he passed himself off as fire, which represents the judgment, so that his offering would go up like smoke, a pleasing aroma to the Eternal. This is a shadow of how the Messiah would be delivered, a delivery complete before the Eternal. Abraham responds to his son. We can see that when Isaac questioned him, we can see that Abraham responds to him, telling him that the Eternal will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. As we know, this lamb was Yeshua. He was offered to bear the sin of humanity. Through him, the Father gave them and also gives us men the opportunity to be restored, as it says in Isaiah 53, verse 6 and 7. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our way, and the Eternal has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before the shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Verses 9 through 11 says, when they reached the place Elohim had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on the top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Eternal called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, here I am," he replied. We can see the maturity of Isaac. He was already a young man of about 20 years old, and we see his willingness to fulfill the will of the Eternal without resisting. In the Judaism, they say that Isaac told his father to tie him really tight so that he wouldn't let go, and that way he can comply with the Eternal's mandate. Here we also see another shadow of the Messiah, who did not refuse to surrender, but we can see that he denied himself and became obedient till death. Abraham took the knife to make the sacrifice, But then the angel of the Eternal stopped him. This angel refers to the Messiah, who is the messenger of the Eternal, who represents him. In Hebrews 1, verses 17 through 19, we are told about this as well. And it says, by faith, Abraham, when the Eternal tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though the Eternal had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be restored. That your offspring will continue or will extend. Abraham reasoned that Elohim could even rise the dead, and so, in the manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. Abraham also believed in the resurrection and was certain that the Eternal would rise his son. And certainly the Eternal raised his own son, Yeshúa. He raised him from the dead after accepting his perfect offering. Verses 12 through 14 says, do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear Elohim, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in a thick he saw a ram caught by his horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place the Eternal will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Eternal it will be provided. We see that he again emphasizes the expression of the Eternal, emphasizes the expression of your only son, that alludes to the Messiah, to that the Eternal refused us, as we read in the book of John 3:16, that says, for the Almighty so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. We can also see that the ram took the place of Isaac, but the announced Lamb who would take the place of humanity was yet to be revealed. As John the Baptist said in John 1, verse 29. The next day, John saw Yeshúa coming toward him and said, look, the Lamb of Elohim, who takes away the sin of the world. On the Mount Moriah, the lamp of provision was manifested. There, the Messiah was delivered, demonstrating that favor that the Eternal had towards all humanity when he took the Messiah instead of us. Verses 15 through 18 say, The angel of the Eternal called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Eternal, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, as the sand in the seashore. Your descendants will take possessions of the cities and of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations of the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me. We see here that the obedience of the patriarch Abraham brought as a reward an innumerous blessing to the offspring, and not only to them, but also to the entire family of the earth. Through his descendant, who is Yeshúa, we see the importance of the obedience to the Creator, and how many blessings the obedience brings to our lives. Through him, today, everyone who returns to the eternal has the blessing of being called son and to be joint heirs with the Messiah of the eternal abodes. We have been added to the people of Elohim through Yeshúa, so that we live consecrated to him like Abraham. Today, that promise has an effect on all those who imitate his faith. The chapter ends with the return of Abraham to Beersheba and the news sometime later. And we see that Abraham receives the news that sometime later that Nachor, his brother, had several children, and among them Bethuel, who is the father of Rebekah, who was going to be the wife of his son Isaac, which we will study later on in the next chapters. And to conclude, what these chapters taught us was that the lives of the patriarchs were a shadow of what happens to the people of Israel and to humanity. We also saw that the importance of faith and obedience to the of faith and obedience to the Creator in the life of the believer through the example of Abraham. And finally, we see the great blessing of which we are part through the delivery of our Messiah, and therefore the need to remain consecrated and faithful without departing until the fulfillment of his promise. And that is all for today's video. Thank you very much for your time. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, you can put them down in the comment section down below. Also, if you would like to share this video, then please share. And once again, thank you and have a good day. Bye.